and welcome to the Business Post podcast with me, Daniel McConnell.
And me, Peter O'Dwyer.
Peter, we have a fascinating guest this week. Billy Hann, he of Dublin Bus. And these people who are giving us great insights into how they do their job, but to actually be responsible for keeping a city moving, a big capital city moving, managing massive budgets, managing kind of a changing fleet, managing narrow streets and ever narrower streets and ever more congested spaces. I thought Billy Hann was good value.
Yeah,
he's a good value guest, I think, for us to have this week.
Yeah, definitely. And I was glad that early in the interview, as people will hear, he outlined his background, because I was somewhat self-conscious that I didn't know Billy Hann until he got into the Dublin Bus job. But that's because he was in the Irish Aviation Authority. He was very much behind the scenes. And actually, it's a nice thread that kind of runs throughout the interview that he didn't even see this move coming. He's now in a very public-facing job in a kind of iconic business.
Yeah.
And coming at that point in his career, he didn't see it coming, but it's been a whole new lease of life for him.
Totally. I found it interesting, whereas in his previous job in the IAA, he would see that as a very much business-to-business relationship. He's dealing with airlines and dealing with the sort of their frustrations about getting people moving, whereas this is much more customer, it's a B2C job. And, as he says, very quickly if your customers are unhappy. Like, it's it's one of those iconic brands that's just in our lives day to day in Dublin. It's
direct feedback, I think you could call it.
That's a very good way of putting it.
He said with the IAA, it was the chief pilot at Aer Lingus or Ryanair, for instance, that they'd be liaising with. Here it's whoever's sitting on the 16 bus into town. It's 3,500 drivers, I think, however many thousand buses, the number of passengers. Like, it's a big network. People depend on it. Like, it's just so central to, obviously, if it's late. He gets into actually really interesting stuff around the logistics and the challenges of scheduling throughout the week and how it varies and how it's moved since post-COVID. But it's just so essential to so many people's lives, so many Dubliners' lives, that you can imagine when things go wrong,
they hear about it very
quickly. Yeah.
And I think with listeners and viewers will see and hear in the interview, I mean, he's very open about how they manage, their monies and their budgets. I was kind of keen, and what I hadn't realised is that because of the integrated ticket system, the money's sort of taken off them and they're given a sort of a service charge from the National Transport Authority. So it's not like, they're waiting on good days and bad days to kind of to keep their coffers going. But it does seem that in a highly, and again, speaking to someone like that, operating in a highly unionised area, that you will hear, dealing with staff disputes, dealing with kind of, getting them around the table, getting their buy-in. I just thought he was very convincing, I thought. And I presume, he has been able to move things quite substantially in his time so far. But it's just a very fascinating insight for me as to how you keep, as I said at the start, how you keep a city moving.
It's probably always true of these types of jobs, but certainly at the moment he's got bus connects that he's managing as a big process. He's got kind of some changes in how the financial structures you've touched on there is changing a little bit. He's got the electric vehicle revolution that he's having to manage. So there's kind of 2, 3, 4 big pieces that he's having to manage all at the one time, which makes for a very interesting time to chat to him.
Very good. Well, now we won't delay you any further. Here now is our interview with Billy Hann of Dublin Bus. Billy Hann, you're very welcome to the Business Post podcast.
Thank you so much, Danny. Thank you for having me here.
No worries. You have a very interesting job. I mean, being the head of Dublin Bus, which obviously a capital city transport company, at a time when the city has grown exponentially, the needs of the capital city have grown and become far and far more complex. You're probably dealing in a highly unionised environment, so it's a job. I think I would say it probably throws up many challenges day after day.
It does, but look, it's everything's in a day's work, as they say, and you're right. The city has grown exponentially. I think we're up around 1.2, 1.3 million in Dublin City. But what's even greater is the growth in actual use of public transport, particularly bus transport. So Dublin Bus on a busy day, we're moving about 550,000 passengers. Last year we were up around 165 million passengers. So the growth within the transport sector, and particularly in buses and in Dublin Bus, has been exceptional. And of course that brings its own challenges with it.
And just talking to you about those challenges, because again, me growing up, it was a very, I won't say linear service, but I grew up in Stillorgan. You got the 46A into town. If you want to go north side, you have to get a second bus. But you now have these cross city routes. You now have the spinal routes. I think you probably have the correct terminology. but it's a much more integrated service or a much more complex service, and it's just evolving the whole time.
It is. And what you're describing there is part of the Bus Connects project, which the NTA, the National Transport Authority, are implementing. So one of the projects as part of Bus Connects is a network redesign of all those routes, as you say. And in simple terms, what they're trying to do is set up a number of spines. So if you can think about it, like it's like a wheel with a hub in the middle, and the hub being your city centre, and then your spokes being the spines, which are going out to the very different suburbs of Dublin City. So that's what they're trying to do, and then they're trying to link them with local routes, which are transversing those spokes of the wheel in simple terms. So you're correct. In simple terms, they're trying to make a much more integrated service from a bus point of view, connecting more people to more places. That's what it's all about. The service I grew up on in the 70s and the 80s is far different than the services now. And as you say, looking back on the numbers we just described earlier, it seems to be working.
Yeah. So when you were looking at this job and considering taking on this job, what was your impression of Dublin Bus going in?
First
as
of all,
a company?
Yeah, first of all, I wasn't looking for the job at the time. I was very, very happy. I worked in the Irish Aviation Authority for 29 years at that stage. So I was I had a very successful career in the Irish Aviation Authority, and then an agency reached out to me and asked me would I be interested in becoming the CEO of Dublin Bus. I wasn't even aware that it was advertised at the time, and then I got into the process with no expectations, to be honest with you. And the more involved I got in the process, the more interested I became in the organisation itself. And then when I was made an offer, it was really an offer that I couldn't refuse. Like growing up in Dublin and being a Dub myself, the brand of Dublin Bus was very significant to me. I would have been a bus
It's one of those brands
myself.
that's just in our lives all the time.
Yeah, of course. And everywhere you look, no matter where you are walking in the city, you'll see a Dublin Bus asset. There's Dublin buses everywhere. So, to see an organisation of that scale, of that size, the amount of reach it has with regards to its customers, I just seen a fantastic opportunity for myself to grow in a different way than I was in the Irish Aviation Authority. The Irish Aviation Authority was very much, a business-to-business sort of relationship. Yeah. Whereas when I go into Dublin Bus, it's very much business to customers. I have 550,000 customers on a daily basis who want to tell me how we're performing. So it's very, very much different than what I was doing before that.
Talk to me then about the scale of the company. As you said, 165 million passengers. What's your fleet like? What's your numbers of bus drivers? Your kind of overall staff number?
Yeah, the fleet itself is getting close to 1,200 vehicles at the moment. Staff numbers around 4,500 overall, around 3,350 drivers. So it's growing all the time, and it's growing to meet the demand for public transport. So it's quite a large operation. 130 routes. We've about 80-85% of the market share. Go Ahead Ireland have the rest of it. 15 24-hour routes. Nobody else is providing 24-hour routes in the city but Dublin Bus. And we're implementing the various different phases of Bus Connects, as I said earlier. So we're on our seventh phase at this stage. So all's going fairly well from that perspective. So it's a big organisation and complex.
So you've a lot of people looking to you to kind of show direction, leadership, all that kind of stuff. When you go in, and you see a structure that's, worked in the time before you've taken it over. I mean, have you gone in and changed the structures around you, or I mean, what has changed since you've gone in?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Danny. When I went in, within 13 days, I was brought into a joint Oireachtas committee meeting, right? And that said it all, to be honest with you. And the reason we were brought in, it was quite justified. We had issues with reliability, we had issues with regards to punctuality and performance around that. So what I started to see in my first number of months working in there was very much reflective of what was going on in the joint Oireachtas committee. So I had a lot to change, to be honest with you. And so what I did was I developed a strategy, an organisational strategy initially, built it from the top down and the bottom up. So a lot of stakeholder engagement at all levels of the organisation.
So it's your drivers, your mechanics, the customers, all the rest of it?
Customers, DOT, boards, chairs, the whole lot. We took input from a lot of different stakeholders, and we landed on a strategy called Evolving for Tomorrow. But the key part for me in Evolving for Tomorrow was developing a very, very simple and clear purpose, right? So when people are developing strategies, they like to talk about mission and vision and everything else. I'm a little bit more simple than that. I just like to know what is the purpose of the organisation. Yeah. So we developed our purpose. It's to provide a quality bus service that connects people to places, making our city a better place to live, work and enjoy. And that resonates with our drivers because they absolutely get it. Okay, supporting then that purpose, we have 6 strategic objectives, and then we have a number of values in the organisation which support and provide the foundation for all our decision making. Now the reality was, I then needed to look at, did I have the skill sets and the competencies within the executive leadership team and the management team and the rest of the organisation to deliver on that purpose and those strategic objectives. Sorry?
What was your conclusion when you asked that question?
I needed to make change, okay? So I made changes to the size of the executive leadership and to the competency and the skill set and the makeup of that executive leadership team. That's all in place now. And the good news is that we're seeing really good positive cultural change within the organisation, which is driving performance. We're seeing significant increases in reliability. We're seeing significant increases in punctuality. And in simple terms, we're trying to become a high-performance organisation.
Yeah.
And I've got great buy-in from the unions. I've got great buy-in from the staff and the drivers themselves, mechanics, the whole lot.
Yeah.
So we're all really pushing hard and going well with regards to the implementation and that cultural change that was needed.
Paul Reid sat in that chair last week, and he obviously has huge experience in dealing, as he said, at highly unionised environments. Like, I've been very critical of public sector unions for not, I mean, they have a job to do in sort of defending their members, etc., like that, but I've often seen them in my view, go over that line in terms of almost being an impediment to progress or an impediment to work. How is your relationship with the unions? How do you go about, I suppose, trying to drive change when it's a very ingrained and very embedded sort of culture in the company?
Yeah, look, I've come from another semi-state body, and then I've come into Dublin Bus, and a lot of people think the unions are, more militant in one area than the other. They're generally not, right?
Yeah.
And my impression is, if you work with them and you listen to them, you're not going to always give a union what they want. They have a membership which they're trying to look after and trying to do their best for. That's their role. I fully understand that, but they fully understand my role as well, because I communicated to them. But to me, it's largely around a partnership approach, and I'd go as far as saying 2026 has been a partnership approach between the management team and the Dublin Bus unions. We've just signed a new pay agreement for the next 4 years. It's the first time in the history of the company that we've got a pay deal through without having to go to the Labour Court.
Okay.
So that on its own is a good indication that there's good working relationships between the executive and the management team and the union leadership itself. So things are really, really good and positive from that perspective. But look, they have a role to do, and it's up to us to listen to them and to recognise what their issues and their concerns are and do our best to address them if we can.
Yeah.
It's always not
And are you
possible
dealing with
to do
one
that.
union, or there are multitude of
No,
unions?
multiple unions.
Okay.
Multiple unions.
Because again, this is an issue that some other people who I've spoken to will say is that there's almost competition between the unions, and that can lead to more militant tendencies.
Yeah, no, I'm not necessarily seeing that. So the main unions we're dealing with are the MBRU and SIPTU as well. And look, they obviously have their own agendas, but by and large, when we get into a room with them, it's they're looking for similar things. We're looking for a certain angle on various different things as well, and we all work together to get a solution. So I'm not necessarily seeing that from my perspective.
But you have to obviously, I suppose, different to say companies where unions may not be recognised, that you can probably move things a little bit faster. There is, I suppose, an inbuilt delay in dealing with unions, but I suppose you're saying the industrial peace element is worth it.
100%. You need to keep them on board. You need to keep them communicated, right?
Yeah.
So you communicate with them on a regular basis. So whilst you are there and you are leading, you're managing the organisation, just keep them up to date, keep them up to speed, keep them involved in the process.
Yeah.
Keep them engaged. And if you're doing that, you will they'll move things actually fairly quickly for you. But look, it's important to recognise they are representing their managers as well. They're not representing management. And once you recognise that, I know Stephen Covey has always said, seek to understand before being understood. And I think that's a fantastic piece of advice to anybody who's getting into leadership or management.
Yeah.
If you go along with that sort of idea, then, you have a chance that they feel that you are listening to them and that you can move forward. If you go in with your idea and your idea only, well, generally it comes to loggerheads, and that's a problem.
I found, because again, having come into the business post and led change and transformation, I mean, the thing I found is it might take a little bit longer, but if you validate their point of view, you might not agree with it, but if you at least listen to them, it makes the job of actually delivering that change an awful lot. And if they can understand where your thinking is, it closes that gap, I think, between potential hostility or kind of suspicion. I found, in my view, being that open, to a point, you can certainly deliver a lot more change.
I would 100% agree with you. There might be a little bit of a delay up front while you're trying to agree, but once you get agreement in place, things move a hell of a lot smoother, a hell of a lot faster. And look, they understand where you're coming from, you understand where they're coming from. You can build in review periods and review clauses and all into whatever agreement you have. But to me, it's all about engagement. And even outside of union negotiations and discussion, meet them on a regular basis and talk to them and see what their issues and their concerns are and keep that engagement going.
And
that's what's important.
And again, I find, because we're very open internally around our metrics and our numbers and our performance, so they can see we're not hiding anything from our team. And I think that, to me, has been a game changer in terms of we're all in the same ship. We can show where we need to focus and we can show where we need to work. But is that a sort of culture that you guys operate?
No, it is. And look, I don't want it to come across as if, we're just rolling over to the unions every time they sort of bark. That's not what happens either. It's important to recognise that there are times where we just need to get something done and we will push it through and we push it through hard and we meet the unions head on if we have to. But that should be the exception. It shouldn't be the norm, and that's how we operate.
Talk to me about the numbers and the finances of Dublin Bus. How does it work? I mean, is it all, obviously you get your revenues from tickets, etc., like that, but obviously now in the kind of integrated ticket system, it's probably not as straightforward as it used to be. How much is the state involved in terms of your numbers? And are you running deficits, surpluses, or what are your numbers like?
There was a time we did take revenue from tickets, but we don't actually anymore. On the backside of COVID, that's all changed now. So the ticket revenue actually goes back into the National Transport Authority, and what they do is they give us what we call an annual service charge. So they will pay us effectively on an annual basis to provide a service for them in accordance with a contract, right? Okay. So we have what's called a public service obligation, or a direct award contract, which has been given to Dublin for 5 years. It's worth 2 billion over 5 years, so it's roughly 400 million a year. It's not quite that way, but it's in simple terms. In simple terms, that's what it looks like. If we don't spend that for whatever reason, then we're giving that back to the NTA and back to the Exchequer. In simple terms, fair revenue, as it says, goes back into the NTA, and then they'll offset that against what they're giving us. So in simple terms, that's how it works. We do take some commercial revenue into the organisation as well. We do have some commercial ventures such as our hop on, hop off tours, and we have some other smaller ventures with regards to our Do Dublin website and our Do Ireland website, where we're sort of a third party seller for various different products that people are selling for tourism around Ireland, and that brings in a small amount of revenue as well.
So that changed the sort of the NTA kind of the service charge model essentially. Does that mean you're a more stable revenue model, or is it more volatile, or how does it work for you? Yeah,
it's interesting that you've mentioned that, because it's still only an annual service charge. We would like to see multi-annual funding, right? So we would much prefer, when I'm developing my 5-year strategies, I'd love to know how much I have to play with over those 5 years. It's not guaranteed, okay? So each year we're going into the NTA, and we roughly know how much we need to provide that service on that year. Yeah. We're not going to be guaranteed payment for that particular year. So we go from year to year trying to adapt and make sure that we have enough money to provide the services that they want us to provide. Yeah. If for whatever reason that money was there, then we have to look at what services that we're providing. In an ideal world, I'd like to see 3, 4 or 5 multi-annual year funding blocks, so we could all plan around that. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. The capital investment side is slightly different than the operational side of it. They obviously have a capital budget which they will I suppose divvy out to the various different modes of transport, whether it be Irish Rail or whether it be Dublin Bus or Bus Air or Go Ahead Ireland, for the implementation of significant projects. They tend to now manage those projects themselves, such as, let's say, the next generation ticketing or the next generation AVL system.
What's AVL?
So that's an automatic vehicle locate. It's the tracking system for the buses in simple terms. So rather than the bus operators now implementing those systems, the NTA are taking ownership of those projects and being supported by the bus operators to actually implement them. So there's a fair bit of capital around them. Electrification would be another one, which is quite big.
So there's again a lot to unpick there, but I mean, from your perspective, are you under pressure then to run a surplus or a deficit, or I mean, how what's your modus operandi going? Is it simply, right, I need this amount of millions every year to run our service and I don't need €1 over that? Or are you trying to bake in, I need a contingency of 10%? I'm just fascinated by how an organisation like yours, given the complexity of issues that you have to deal with, you're trying to manage a budget. Yeah,
no, look, in simple terms, when you're pushing yourself forward for your ASC, you're trying to determine how much it will be to run that service on any given year, right? And you're trying to take into account what fuel or what materials price inflation may be. So there may be a certain amount of, contingency funding in there, but that all has to be accounted for and agreed with the NTA. And as I said, if there's something which is unspent, it's given back to the NTA at the end of the year. Now, that being said, as an organisation, we're very, very cost conscious. Okay, so we're very conscious that it's Exchequer money effectively that we're spending. Yeah. So we try to keep our costs as minimum as we possibly can. So run the operation as efficient as we can. Do we have some road to go on that? We absolutely do. No different than any other semi-state or organisation or operation that's running services as complex as Dublin Bus. So we're constantly looking at our costs as well to see, can we do things more efficiently? And we have done that in the last 3 to 5 to 6 years and given money back to the NTA.
One of the issues that comes up a lot is the move from, say, away from fossil fuel vehicles to electric vehicles. And obviously there have been reports about buses sitting in depots because there aren't enough charging points and all that kind of stuff. Where's your head in relation to making sure that the system is fit for purpose in terms of bringing in or making that transition?
Yeah, it's a really good point. Look, I suppose the reason we're going down this road is to meet our climate action targets. I think that's the first thing to mention. moving from a diesel operated fleet to a fully electrified fleet is quite complex and quite significant, right? So at the moment we bring our buses in at night, we clean them and we fuel them and they're ready for the next morning, right? Once you electrify that full fleet, now you have to bring them in and now you have to put a charging process around it and manage the charging process around it. So it's a hell of a lot more complex. We are already starting to embark on that journey, as you'll be aware. The NTA are responsible for the purchasing of the vehicles. We don't do that. However, we are responsible for the implementation of the charging systems. In Dublin Bus, we have 196 chargers available to us at this moment in time. We have 160 buses, electric buses in our fleet, which we're operating. So we do have room to take in more. And we're constantly and continuously expanding. I'd say by the end of 2026, we'll be up around 220 electric vehicles.
Okay.
But that's not including our hybrids. We have about another 20% of our fleet, which is hybrids as well. The reason we're doing it, as I said, is to try and make our city a cleaner, greener, quieter place. The reaction from our drivers has been fantastic. The reaction from our customers is fantastic. However, it is new technology, and new technology brings its challenges and brings its issues. So when it comes to reliability of the charging systems and the buses themselves, we are having issues around that. So we need to adopt them at a rate that it's not impacting the service to the customer on the street.
What are those issues, I suppose? Is it charging range? Is it what are the sort of issues that are coming up?
The range isn't necessarily a massive issue, although it will bring complexity to our operation. The range of the bus is around 220 kilometres, right? Now, that's not ideal for all our routes. About 60% of our routes could do a 220 range for the day, right?
Yeah,
so that would get you through all your routes for the day. However, there's about 40% of it that's not suitable for, and we haven't implemented them on those routes yet. But when we do, we'll end up in a situation where we have to bring buses back for charge and take another one out that's already charged. So that goes back to the complexity issue I was talking about earlier. But the reality is, some of the issues we're having, they're largely technical. I don't know whether you drive an electric car yourself, but I do. And some of the problems you'll have is, if I go into a shopping centre and I plug my electric car in and I go into the shop, sometimes I come out and it hasn't charged, right? There's issues with regards to the communications interface between the charger and the bus itself, or there's an issue with the car, there's an issue with the charger itself. So there's a myriad of technical issues that can actually go wrong on you. The bus fleet is no different, okay? So, except we're doing it on a much larger power scale and on a much bigger scale, so you're seeing it more pronounced than, let's say, the normal sort of car driver would see it for the smaller number of occasions that they're using. So they're the technical issues that we're seeing. We're working extremely hard with the manufacturers of the chargers and the buses to address those issues and address those problems to allow us to adopt at a quicker rate.
So are we looking at a situation then you won't be able to put buses out on the road because you either don't have the sufficient charging facilities or capacity, or you've got these issues arising, or are you satisfied as the chief executive that we're step by step we can do that effectively and we won't have buses sitting idle because we can't charge them?
Well, I can't comment on the buses and the purchasing of the buses because, as I said, the National Transport Authority so I'm not familiar with the contract they have and the many buses they have and everything else, but I am very familiar with the amount of buses that we're using and so on, and our demand for them. Look, as I said earlier, we slowed down the implementation of the electrification program to protect our customers and protect the reliability of our service to our customers. Had we really accelerated that program, which we technically could have done, we would have ended up dropping service to our customer on the street, and we couldn't do that. However, if we get these issues with regards to the technical issues with the chargers and the buses fixed, then we should be in a position where we can accelerate that program. We won't be, certainly I won't be advocating for, pushing buses into service for the sake of meeting our climate action targets. That's going to decimate the service we're providing to our customers. There's other ways of addressing the climate action targets with regards to the use of biofuels and all. And we can look at, as an interim measure, a blended approach with regards to increasing our use of biofuels, with electrification, with hybrids and so on, to reduce our CO2 emissions, but at the same time keep our service and reliable service going.
Have you been affected in terms of the fuel need that you have by the Strait of Hormuz? I mean, has there been an impact in terms of what you needed to take in?
No, we're reasonably protected by that because we keep good contingencies between ourselves, Bus Éireann and Irish Rail. We have a significant storage of fuel that will keep us going.
So you're well hedged, essentially.
Yeah, we're well hedged from that perspective.
Is it cheaper to run an electrified fleet or a diesel fleet, or what's the margin, say, between running both?
It's an exercise, interesting, we haven't finished at the moment, so we're looking at, so I can't give you exact figures on it, but I would imagine, my gut feeling would tell me, initially it's more expensive, so the capital cost for getting your charging infrastructure in, the civils around that, the charging infrastructure itself, the capital cost of an electric bus is more expensive than it would be for a diesel bus. once you get them in and you start running them over and they become reliable and your maintenance isn't as high as it possibly would be on a diesel bus, but that all will take time. So I would imagine after a number of years, it should become cheaper to run electric buses, but it's still too early to actually make that decision or make that determination at the moment.
We've heard a lot around Metro North being delivered, because obviously the main route out to the airport for a lot of people is a bus, be it the air coach or your own service, your express services out to the airport. What impact will Metro have on your service across the board, given, I suppose, between the construction phase and then when it's actually up and running? I mean, does that pose a challenge to you in your future?
Yeah, no, we don't see it as a challenge at all, and we'd be quite supportive of Metrolink. I'd actually be quite supportive of all modes of transport. I fundamentally believe that Dublin City needs to improve its transport infrastructure, and I think Metrolink North will be a very, very useful addition to that. So we don't see it as competition, we don't see it as a problem at all. We see it as actually complementary to what we're actually doing from a bus industry perspective. So we would be quite supportive of Metrolink North.
Now, I've covered a lot in my years, all the discussion around Dublin City Council reconfiguring Dublin City Centre. You look at College Green, you look at O'Connell Street. Some people take the view, should our main thoroughfare essentially be a glorified bus stop, as that's their view, not mine. But I suppose the narrowness of College Green now with the Lewis running through, the Lewis is running through, it's a very congested space. What can be done to improve that, or are you just stuck with a very narrow space to try and get a very high level of buses through there every day?
I think it's a really, and it's not just in College Green, it's in lots of areas around the city. I think one of the challenges we have as a city is we're working with a finite amount of space, and it's not a large amount of space, to be honest with you. Like, from our perspective, we would like to be repurposing, space that's being used for cars, for buses. 60% of the traffic which is going to the city at the moment is actually going through the city. It's not even stopping off at the city. And we did see Dublin City Council, supported by the NTA and ourselves and a number of other stakeholders, pushed with regards to the changes they made along the quays there as well. Yeah. That has had significant improvements with regards to the reliability of our services on the north and the south side of the quays. There was a lot of objections to that, particularly with the business community in around.
Well, Guinness, obviously, the obvious ones.
Well, there was quite. It wasn't just Guinness, and I'm not going to mention them at the moment. There was a number of them, particularly in the retail business, that had concerns and issues around those changes. Now, there has been review groups set up on the back end of those changes, and none of the fears that people had has actually come to life. Right, yeah. So the changes have been very, very positive from a public transport point of view. And the fears that people had from a business point of view actually haven't come to life. So the reality is they've been really, really positive. And what I would be saying is, as a city, we need to embrace these changes and we need to be brave with them. If they're not working, don't be afraid to reverse them. They don't need to be in there forevermore. So the kind of point I would make is that we, whatever the plans are with regards to the changes for decongesting our city, let's be brave enough to implement them. If there's significant issues and problems, let's look at them and let's make changes to them and try and fall forward. And if changes aren't possible, let's reverse it.
Are Dublin City Council an obstacle to you getting your job done, or are they a partner you just have to deal with? Because I sometimes sense that relations can be strained between Dublin Bus and Dublin City Council.
No, I certainly wouldn't see it that way. Look, we have a number of stakeholders which we work very, very closely with, the National Transport Authority being one with them, and Dublin City Council being another with them. We have a really good, strong relation, particularly up at the senior level, with all the various different stakeholders, including Dublin City Council. On a day-to-day basis, our inspectors, our chief inspectors, our drivers are interacting with Dublin City Council, whether there's issues or problems, and we always find them being very reactive. So if we have an issue or have a problem, bollards go up in a particular area which are now causing us problems or issues, they do tend to move quickly and work with us to address those issues and problems. So no, I wouldn't necessarily see a tense relationship or a problematic relationship with Dublin City Council.
What's the biggest challenge facing you now on Dublin Bus?
Look, there's a number of challenges. You said it earlier yourself on any given day. The first one I'd always say is safety. Okay, so the safety of our employees and the safety of our customers is first and foremost in our strategy and within our sort of decisions on a day-to-day basis. We did implement our Safer Journeys team a number of years ago. That's been very, very successful. The government are looking to implement the Transport Security Force. We will be very supportive of that.
That was done concept on a pilot basis, wasn't it? Or there was a kind of security guards put on a pilot basis?
Yeah, that was a pilot basis, but it's more full-time now at the moment. Okay. But it's still an interim measure until the Transport Security Force come into place. That model hasn't been fully agreed yet, but we are, supporting the Department of Transport and the NTA with regards to how that might work, along with the unions as well. So that'd be the first thing I'd say. Secondly, to provide a reliable and a punctual service, obviously to provide a reliable service, I need to get buses out there every day. So driver recruitment is always a challenge.
You have a heavy enough shortfall, do you?
We've about 65, 70 shortfall at this moment in time. But I have...
So I actually thought it was higher than that.
Yeah, no, and I have about 93 drivers which we're bringing over from South Africa in the pipeline to plug that particular gap. So the challenge around reliability will be largely around recruitment of drivers and mechanics, but we have a very, very aggressive recruitment programme, both nationally and internationally, to address that.
And when you're going out to market, I'm really interested in this. When you're going out to market, I mean, what's the biggest impediment? Is it monetary? Is it terms and conditions? What are people saying? I would do that job, but...
Yeah, I suppose, first of all, one of the biggest impediments we had was you needed to have a D licence, which is a heavy good vehicles licence. And that market's dried up. So we just don't have people in this country or anywhere else in Europe that there's a profound amount of D licence drivers. We changed that criteria to B licence now. So if you're a car driver with a clean licence for 2 years, you can apply for a job in Dublin Bus. Now, what that's meant is we need to elongate the training time and to actually get them up to the level of D licence and so on. But we've done that, and that's worked really well. So the amount of people interested in becoming a bus driver now is not our main issue. We just need to get them in, get them trained and processed through the system. From a mechanics point of view, that's probably a bigger issue. We can't get qualified mechanics in Ireland. Like we could do a whole other podcast on lack of tradespeople in this country, and there's various different reasons.
Comes up regularly enough on this,
exactly. And there's various different reasons for that. But in fact, effectively, we lost a generation of tradespeople. We've brought in over 60 people from the Philippines in the last 2 years to work as mechanics in the organisation. So now getting the number of drivers we need, getting the number of mechanics we need, that will improve reliability and punctuality. And then look, I can't go away without mentioning congestion in the city and the variability of that congestion. So if you think about it, I'm trying to provide a service Monday to Friday, Saturday and Sunday, which is scheduled service, right? You try and do that when the traffic conditions are varying on a daily basis and on an hourly basis is really, really difficult. So the congestion is a significant issue for us.
And talk to me about the congestion, because again, like as you say, one day you could drive down a particular street and you get through it pretty quickly, and the next thing you see, there's 15 buses back to back and they're not moving, and you kind of go, well, it's going to take me 40 minutes to get through.
So if you think about it as a driver, and this is more pronounced in a post-pandemic world than it has been before. So we traditionally timetable Monday to Friday, Saturday and Sunday, and the timetable is the same Monday to Friday. The traffic conditions on Mondays and Fridays, not all the time, but invariably different than they are now Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. So our busiest days now for traffic congestion are Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays, and much lighter on Mondays and Fridays. But our drivers are still driving a schedule on a Monday that's the same as Tuesday, Wednesdays and Thursdays. So you could come out on a Monday to drive a schedule and there's nothing in front of you. Now we're having to slow our bus drivers down, right? And what you will find from time to time is our bus drivers having to pull in
and
to the side and stop and wait. And the whole idea of that is, which it drives you insane when you're on the bus, it's to try and make sure that you're on time for the customer who's downstream. So when you're downstream from the bus, you're happy for them to be on time. When you're on the bus,
if you're in a rush, and it can be
exactly. So there's a frustration there for the customer. But the whole idea of that is to try and keep yourself on time for the whole journey. Now, what we're looking to do with the NTA is move away from Monday to Friday timetabling and have a different schedule and timetable for Monday and Friday as it is Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And we need to move towards that. And the NTA, in fairness to them, when they look at the data with us, are starting to move in that direction, but we're not quite there yet.
What are your congestion black spots? Where are the worst spots?
Everywhere. So it really depends. North Circular Road, South Circular. The Keys would have been a terrible black spot. That actually has improved, but certainly North Circular Road, South Circular Road would be issues and problems. But Clontarf was terrible there for a while as well, but the new roads have been gone in and implemented.
With the new widened kind of bus lanes, etc.
Exactly. And then you'll have roadworks which pop up from time to time. You'll have various different protests which go on from time to time. The city, it's amazing to watch the city. If you went down to our control room in Broadstown and watched the city on any given day, how complex and how dynamic it is, given what's going on, whether there's an accident, whether there's a protest. A lot of these are not predictable, so our controllers and our drivers are having to adapt to it on a daily basis.
What gives you the most grief in this job?
Look, I don't take anything as grief, to be honest with you. I see it as a day in the life of Dublin Bus, to be honest with you. When you're dealing with when you're dealing with a customer and there's 550,000 of them a day, there's going to be a little bit of heartache with that, but that's all part and parcel of the job. And both myself and everyone else in Dublin Bus, we just embrace that and we get on with it, and we try to deliver the best service that we can to our customers, because that's what we're all about. We're all about what I really love about Dublin Bus. There's a real family and community spirit in it, and they really take great pride in delivering that service to our customers. So, we don't necessarily see anything as being heartache or grief. We just get on with it and we do our best to improve our services.
Are you a resilient person?
I would say so. Look, I've been in transport for the last 33 years. In the air traffic services side of it, there was a lot of pressure from a different perspective there. In Dublin Bus, there's a lot of pressure from a different perspective there. So I would say resilience is part and parcel of my makeup.
How would you differentiate? Because again, you're probably saying you were a more B2B service in the IAA than you are now. Talking about that difference in that pressure.
Yeah, I suppose, from a business to business point of view, look, there's no hiding behind it. In air traffic services, you're always concerned about safety. Now, that's not to say you're not on Dublin Bus. Of course you are. But, God forbid if there's a significant accident over the North Atlantic or an approach to Dublin Airport or Cork Airport, it pricks the ears and it kind of makes you very, very tentative, So there was always sort of a tenseness around that business, albeit it's managed within an inch's life and it's an incredibly safe business. When you work within it, there's still always, a little bit of intensity around it. I suppose that's what keeps us on our toes and that's what keeps us fit. Dealing with business to business was a little bit different than dealing with business to customer because, look, the business themselves, we were dealing with the airlines all the time, so they would bring their own grief and their own problems. But you were dealing with them, you were dealing with, let's say, the chief pilot from Ryanair or from Aer Lingus or whatever it was, and you were listening to their opinions and issues. I'm listening to the customer who's taking our service on a daily basis. I'm not listening to, when I was in the IA, I wasn't listening to the passengers on board the aircraft.
You were listening to the companies.
Exactly. So it tends to be a slightly different narrative that you're getting from a business to business relationship.
What was the grief you were getting from the airlines? What were they saying to you? Move us quicker, move us faster?
Exactly. Safety was, I'm not going to say safety was a given because it never is in any different engine. We invested an awful lot of time into that. But it would be all about punctuality. It would be all about getting a super slick service to be as efficient as they possibly can. Because, look, fuel burn was incredibly important for the airlines. So it's because it's costly. So they'd be obviously trying to make sure that they're getting the most efficient route into the airport at any given time or across their airspace at any given time. And we put a lot of effort and a lot of work when I was in the IAA into doing that and meeting the requirements.
And talking about most efficient, is that sort of mapping out, and not to get too airline nerdy about this, but are you talking about kind of air routes in, air routes out, or like what particularly were they giving out about? Was it just that you were kind of sending them too far out of the way to loop back in, or what's the...
There was a time that was the case, but it's gone so standardised now, and there was a number of... So if you were flying into Dublin Airport now and you were on approach, let's say runway 28, now I'm getting very technical from an aviation point. So you were in there, so you probably know about the point merge system that we implemented in there. So instead of doing racetrack patterns around in circles where we were dropping aircraft and descending and then bringing them in for approach, they were on an extended leg. That was a hell of a lot more efficient and a hell of a lot less fuel burn when it actually came to the operation at it. You're probably aware of free route airspace coming in from the North Atlantic and across into Europe as well. So that helped as well, particularly on the Atlantic, giving them the flight level that they wanted. They'd obviously be chasing a tailwind as much as they can, allowing them to do that. So everything that was going to support them and getting there faster and getting them there, in the most fuel efficient way, they would sort of be looking for, and we would look to put mechanisms in to do that.
Do you miss it?
I love Dublin Bus, so I don't have time to miss it, to be honest with you. Do I miss the business and the people? Maybe, but I have certainly moved on from it. The best decision I ever made was coming to Dublin Bus. I think as an individual myself, I've grown significantly because it now is business to customer rather than business to business. Doing these podcasts, I've never done that type of thing before. So it's a different brief. As I said, I've grown a hell of a lot since I came into Dublin Bus in the last 3.5 years, and I've loved every minute of it. I'm a real people person, so I love being out there with our customers and with our frontline personnel. I got to do less of that, I suppose, in the Aviation Authority. But what a fantastic industry the aviation is in this country, and aviation boxes well above its weight in this country. Certainly, I had a great sense of pride of what I did and what I achieved in the IAA. But I never look back. I always look forward.
What do you do to manage? Because again, people who've sat in this chair and talked to me, I'm very interested about how they manage sort of the bad days or the heavy days and the kind of the stresses. What's your go-to technique in order to shake off a bad day?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Look, it's I suppose from a physical and a mental point of view, I'm big into exercise. Okay, so swimming is my go-to exercise. I used to play a lot of badminton as well, but the body doesn't hold up for that anymore. So I was a junior competitive swimmer in Aer Lingus many years ago. It's so long ago, it doesn't even bear thinking about. But I'm still competing at masters level with regards to that, and I'm doing a bit of open water swimming and competitions around that as well. So I suppose my poison is pool swimming and open water swimming, and that helps me keep grounded from a physical point of view and a mental point of view. So when I'm struggling, I'd probably go into the swimming pool and try and fix the problems of the world and the problems of Dublin Bus in my head while I'm training. So that would be, and look, bouncing things off people who I work with as well, and bouncing things. My wife is a great mentor and coach as well, so I'd use her quite extensively as well to bounce ideas off.
Actually, that was my next question, is like, because I talked to business leaders, and even Sabrina Casalta of Vodafone sat in and here, and she talked about her move from Italy to Ireland and having those sort of external people, not in the company necessarily, who act as a mentor for her. I mean, have you relied on those sort of people who have given you kind of advice or kind of steered you right?
I have. And look, the reality is people say that, in CEO positions or at the top, it's a very, very lonely place. And it can be, but it doesn't have to be. That's the funny thing. So, I would confide in people within the organisation, and I certainly would confide with people outside the organisation. I haven't done coaching in a while because I just haven't had the capacity to do it, but I have used it in the past and used it very, very effectively in the past. And of course, I do bounce things off friends and family as well. Okay. Yeah, for sure.
What is your idea of your worst day, and what's the idea of your best day in this job?
Oh, look, a perfect day for me in the job would be every bus turns up, and every bus turns up on time, and everybody is safe and gets to their destination 100% of the time. That's, that's a utopia, which is never going to be met given the complexities of the city we work in and the variabilities of our operation on any given day. The worst day is, the worst day I can actually think of and that we experienced was the riots, the November riots a couple of years ago, when everything went heads up on the back end of a very, very serious incident, a very, very tragic incident as well. But unfortunately, we lost control of the city that time. The state lost control of the city, and that significantly impacted our operation from a Dublin Bus perspective. Like, to see our buses being burned out on O'Connell Bridge, it broke my heart, to be honest with you. And to think that our drivers potentially were in danger. Now we pulled our services at a particular time in that crisis because we felt it was too unsafe to provide those services.
Mode. Where are you when you do that? Where, are you in the control room, or are you at home, or where? When that decision is taken to pull the service, where are you?
It depends. In the most recent fuel protest, I was in the control room because it happened at a time where I was on my way into work and I made my way to the control room. The protests were a little bit different. I was already home, and I spent pretty much my whole evening on Zoom or on Teams calls and on the phone trying to, in significant issues like that, we would invoke our crisis management plans, and then we go into crisis management mode. And I would take control of that, and we'd have the various different members of the executive leadership team in on it, as well as various different operational experts and all. And I just go into crisis management mode. I've dealt with it in the aviation in my past. I've dealt with it in Dublin Bus.
So you're that steady hand on the tiller, I suppose?
I would even say I nearly excel in that particular mode. But because I get this adrenaline rush and I just keep going. But the problem is sustaining it for a long period of time can be difficult. But I would definitely say the November riots was probably the darkest day that I've seen in my small time in Dublin Bus. Was there any,
because again, obviously, as you said, there's a genuine safety fear for your workers, those who are on the front line. You see your buses getting burnt out. I mean, at what point did you say, do you feel like you're beginning to get back in control, or how long did it take for you to say, right, okay, we can now stand down that crisis mode and start putting it back together?
We be liaising with Garda Síochána very closely during those type of issues and problems, and when we feel that maybe we've lost control of the city. That's the only time I'd ever say that, because it's the first time I've ever seen it in Dublin City. But the reality was there was rioters running riot across the city. That was too dangerous for us, and particularly, we'd actually pulled our service before a bus was actually born. But we were getting reports of drivers who were on their way to collect buses to provide services with their hat on, being attacked, So when you start to get that and you feel like safety is our absolute number one priority in the organisation for our employees and for our customers. As soon as we feel safety is being compromised, we'll pull our services. Now, look, we have to do that on a daily and a weekly basis in some places.
You pull routes at a certain place where you won't go in?
If we have antisocial behaviour incidents that have escalated to a situation where we feel the driver safety or our customer safety is in peril, we will withdraw that service for a period of time. The difference between the November riots and the fuel protests, we didn't pull them for the fuel protests. We changed the service we were providing, but for the November riots, we pulled our services across the whole network. Largely, it's a simple decision at the end of the day. We couldn't guarantee the safety of our employees or of our customers. So that decision becomes easy then at that stage. To go back to the question you asked, how do we get back into service? Very, very rapidly, funny enough, once Garda Síochána could give us the assurances that it was safe to now continue operations or put operations back into services. Dublin Bus employees will never be found wanting when it comes back to returning services like that. They put the shoulder to the wheel, and within a number of hours our services would have been back up and on.
Is Dublin a racist city?
I wouldn't think so. I think it's a much more cosmopolitan city. Is there pockets of racism in Dublin City and every other city I've ever visited? Possibly, yes. our drivers experience it from time to time.
That's why I wanted to ask that question, because
from time to time our drivers would experience it. We have, I think we're up to maybe 92 or 97 different nationalities working in Dublin Bus. And by the way, that's reflective of the communities that we're serving, right? So that's a real positive from that perspective. But it does bring its challenges, and there is no doubt about it, some of our drivers do experience racism from time to time. So it is there in the city. There's no point in saying it's not. But do I think it's there in mass scale? No, I don't think it's there in mass scale at the moment. But it's something that we need to address as a society, and that we shouldn't tolerate, and that we should look to discourage from all parts of society.
So what's next for you? How many in your head have you committed to Dublin Bus forever, or is there a certain timescale that you're here for?
No, well, I'm on a 7-year contract, and that's pretty standard for semi-state CEOs. So look, with regards to the challenges which I just outlined and the opportunities that are there. So there are opportunities for us from a commercial space as well, and there's opportunities for us to do better in what we're doing as well, and to discuss some of them areas. So my focus is purely 100% on making sure Dublin Bus is being driven in a direction that high performance is where we're going, and we're delivering a fantastic service to our customers. So that's where my mind is at the moment.
Kenny Jacobs, I interviewed him, and he talked the issue of semi-state pay for his chief executives came up, and he said semi-state don't get enough. And where's your head about the rate of pay for yourself?
Well, I think that was changed recently. So I think it was too low, to be honest with you. The government did put in a special review committee which has had a look at that. They made their recommendations to government, and those recommendations have started to be implemented. The reality is some changes have been made on the back end of that, and I think it's starting to become more in line with what's there in private industry.
Because I think, again, Kenny would make the point that you may not ever match what's in the private sector, but for relative companies in the private sector, but that gap did need to be bridged somewhat to make it competitive and to get the right people into the job.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. But if anyone's in a public service or a semi-state job just for the money, you're in the wrong job.
The wrong job, yeah.
Because the grief and the hassle that you have to deal with on a daily basis, some of which we already discussed.
Particularly the Oireachtas committees.
Well, a bit of everything, it can be very, very stressful. It can be equally stressful as any private job, that's the reality of it. Shareholders are shareholders. There just might be different types of shareholders which are demanding different things. So I would think, yes, I think the new review committee has gone a long way to address that issue, but I still would say most people who are in those jobs are doing it for the passion of making a difference for the public in which they're trying to serve.
Well, Billy, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. It's been fascinating to kind of get an insight to how Dublin City Bus and Dublin Bus runs, and you're so integral to the running of a capital city here. But thank you very much for your time and for joining us here on Business Bus Podcast.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Appreciate it.
Great stuff. Welcome back, Peter. I really enjoyed that. I actually thought, Billy's done some writing for us in the Business Bus. I hadn't actually met him in person before, but I just thought good value for money in terms of his openness. Fascinating with how he approaches the job, his own leadership style. But we're also really interested in talking about the riots and what happened on the riots, and what they did and how they managed it. I mean, and to use that language, we lost control of the city. I mean, it was a very visceral description of what happened that night.
Yeah, no, he goes into good depth on that. What I actually thought was the most standout quote of certainly that section, when we were talking about the crisis management and was he in the control room or was he at home, and he said he was at home during the Dublin riots given the nature of the time when it happened. He said very bluntly, I excel in these moments.
Yes.
Which was a bit unusual but kind of refreshing to hear. And it sounded like, he obviously didn't enjoy what was happening, but he kind of enjoyed the challenge of fixing it, of writing it, of getting his arms around it quickly. And I thought that came true.
As we say in a sporting parlance at the moment, he's a tournament player, a big game player.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And probably comes from his background at the IAA, where high stakes was the nature of the game. It was interesting, just his little insight into that organisation, that there's this kind of stress and tension that pervades the air in the IAA all the time, and that it was refreshing to be relieved of that when he left, but also that it was necessary to have it, because obviously that's what keeps them on their toes in there.
Yeah, and it's sort of been a recurring theme of all the sort of leaders, and we've had a lot of top people on this podcast, but the similarities of how they managed themselves during those kind of, we're hearing a lot of collaborative leadership, and we're hearing a lot about rather than the sort of the bull in the china shop type approach. I wonder, is that just what they're supposed to say in PR interviews or whatever that. But he strikes me as someone with a kind of a high level of energy, given his background as well. Having not, I suppose, been a lifer within Dublin Bus as well, he was kind of come in as an outsider and kind of, he almost has to kind of earn his stripes with the unions and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's clear up to this point anyway, somewhat successfully.
The big sense that I got right throughout it, and we touched on it at the start before the interview, is the idea that this was so out of the blue. He never really had designs on leaving the IAA. He was happy there, good solid job, he liked it. This process came to him rather than the other way around. And suddenly he finds himself as the head of this brand that he has, grown up, lived around for decades and decades. And it just seems to me it's given him a real shot in the arm that he liked the job he was in before, but now he's almost found himself in his kind of ideal job. And you can see that with the gusto that he speaks about the challenges and how he goes about it. And it feels authentic because I think he kind of feels like he's in bonus territory.
Yeah.
That this second career was never in the stars for him necessarily. Now he has it. There's big challenges to get stuck into, and he's going about it.
And I think probably going back, 20, 30 years, there probably may have been a sense that, a job in, say, Bus Éireann or Éireann or Éireann may not have been the most, if not interesting, because, probably limiting the amount of money that you had to spend. I'd say renewing your fleet may have been tricky. You're dealing, as I said, in a tricky unionised environment where staff are probably more unhappy than they are now. Whereas now his big challenge, as he says, is actually getting mechanics in and getting drivers in. What struck me again and again in the interview was there were repeated references to bringing people in from abroad to basically kind of keep the show on the road. I mean, that's a first-hand experience of the problem or the dichotomy of the Irish economy, like.
Yeah, exactly. Like we always talk about these high-skilled people that we need. We don't always think of it through the prism of something, a company like Dublin Bus. I think drivers are, because they're so evident, obviously, that's kind of known. We have a lot of people who have come from overseas to bulk up the numbers there, and he seems to be in a pretty good space in terms of the number that we have. But it's the mechanics. Did you say 65 from the Philippines?
Yes, yeah.
Something in that region. That's just really interesting stuff in terms of the nuts and bolts of keeping the fleet moving.
What's your assessment overall of the state of Dublin Bus, its health, and obviously with Bus Connects coming down the line? What's your overall assessment of its position and how strong a position or weak position is it in?
I think it seems to be in a much better. They seem to be through the teething period, or a lot of it, of the Bus Connects. Because naturally, with anything that is so public facing, as soon as there's change to that, and the route I've always known for decades and decades has changed, there's a lot of anger, might be too strong, but kind of
annoyance,
disappointment, annoyance. Yeah, they seem to be through the worst of that. There'll be more land purchases, but it's up and running. It's starting to prove itself. I think that's quite good. I think stuff like he touched on. The 15, 24-hour buses, that expansion of services, the better service you can give people, I think, buys you a lot of credit in the bank for when there's a bit of annoyance to be taken as well. Financially, I thought he was interesting, and I'd like to understand it even a little bit more. So he was talking about that they have a kind of multi-year funding to a degree, that it's 2 billion over the 5 years, and it doesn't quite work out as, equally over the couple of years. But then he did ask, or say that his ask was that there'd be proper multi-annual funding.
So rather than having to go for with the begging bowl, have to go with the request year on year.
Yeah, so it seems to kind of be there that it's this 2 billion figure spread over a number of years, but he wants either a longer term horizon, or he wants greater certainty on whatever the individual year is. So I think that's an interesting push that he's putting on things.
Yeah.
And then I thought he was very interesting on, which is the future of the bus network, the EVs, the good and the bad. And you could imagine, he was asking you if you drive an EV. I do in the last year or so. Love it for the most part, but as soon as the charger doesn't work, things are bad.
You feel it very quickly.
You feel it very quickly, and you could imagine that multiplied across 3,500 buses or whatever the full network will be.
The one thing where I thought he was probably not less convincing, but I did struggle a bit, was where he, this whole stuff about, chargers or buses not being used because they don't have the charging infrastructure. Essentially you're trying to say, well, that's an NTA problem. It did smack of a little bit, well, it's them over there, not responsible rather than us. But
yeah.
I think overall, I think because we see it with our own eyes, we see the zero emissions buses on the streets every day. It clearly is a level of success there in what they've been able to achieve. He did reference, I think, slightly obliquely, the idea of competition in the market. He said that they've got 85% of the routes. One would wonder how resilient Dublin Bus would be, say, if there was real competition put on a lot more routes, and see how they would compete.
Yeah, and on the NTA point, I thought it was interesting. It might have just been a quirk of his speech, but early on in it, he referenced the NTA and said, what they're trying to do. I think it was in relation to Bus Connects, which kind of struck me as interesting, that Dublin Bus seems to be more the operator, I suppose, and NTA is the strategist.
Yeah.
And I think that comes back to your point as well there that you just mentioned about the NTA. That must be an interesting kind of balance to strike of, this is my network, can I not do the strategy and not just be the operator of it, but they have this kind of parent body above it. I think you're probably right. I mean, competition is always good. Would force a bit of cost cutting, perhaps a bit of efficiencies. So the fact that it's starting to come into the system, I don't know if there is a target actually for how much of that network will go to private operators down the line. But it would certainly be something to watch if it does come to pass, yeah.
So it was. Well, listen, that was our interview with Billy Hann, of the Chief Executive of Dublin Bus. Before we go, I'd like to remind you again of our Leadership Awards, which are happening in November. And if you know a Chief Executive, or if you feel that you as a Chief Executive are worthy of a nomination, we encourage you to get your nominations in now. We have a number of categories, small, medium and large enterprises, and there's other leadership categories there that you can take a look on our website. The website is leadership-awards.ie. That's leadership-awards.ie. Get your nominations in, and we look forward to seeing you in the Mansion House on the 5th of November. Until then, from me, Daniel McConnell.
And me, Peter O'Dwyer.
Bye-bye for now.